Welcome to our channel. Today we explore the remarkable life and heartbreaking story of Linda McCartney, an extraordinary woman who left an indelible mark as a photographer, musician, and animal rights activist. From her early days capturing iconic images of rock legends to becoming the love of Paul McCartney's life, Linda's journey was one of passion, resilience, and creativity. Join us as we dive into her inspiring legacy, her challenges, and the impact she continues to have even after her untimely passing. Linda McCartney, born Linda Louise Eastman, though her birth surname was Epstein, and hailing from the frenetic heartbeat of New York City, was no stranger to the limelight, even as a child. Her father was a well-known entertainment lawyer whose clientele included jazz and pop icons. So Linda grew up in a realm where meeting Tommy Dorsey or Harold Arlen hardly made her blink. That easy familiarity with celebrities might have ignited in her a certain spark, the sense that pursuing an artistic life wasn't just possible, it was practically her destiny. Yet for all that early exposure to stardom, Linda was not one to bask in it as a mere observer. She was at heart an explorer, someone who yearned to create, to express, to connect with nature, and to capture the raw spontaneity of life itself through her camera. But getting to that point would require a journey, one that started in Scarsdale, the affluent New York suburb where Linda spent her formative years. She breezed through Scarsdale High School, graduating in 1959, by which time she had begun to feel the tug of a more creative calling. Her father, Leopold, born Epstein, but often referred to by the surname Eastman, wanted her to follow him into law, but Linda found the courtrooms and legal briefs stifling. A fire burned within her, a wanderer's soul that longed for the unpredictable road of art, photography, and, ultimately, music. She took a small but defiant step by enrolling in an Associate of Arts program, finishing that in 1961. Though the rest of her family lined up for law degrees, her older brother headed off to Harvard, and her younger sisters were also leaning that way. Linda couldn't see herself as part of that world. She was dubbed the black sheep at home, but to Linda, it felt more like liberation than alienation. Her curiosity for creation and nature soon led her to Arizona for her postgraduate work in fine arts. The desert sky, the warm hues, the cacti standing tall under the blazing sun, all of it enthralled her artistic spirit. She felt a profound pull toward photography, as if still images could capture more truth than hours of spoken testimony. While her father continued nudging her to consider formal studies in photography, Linda insisted that hands-on experience trumped theoretical instruction. She didn't have the patience to sit in a classroom dissecting the technicalities of apertures or darkroom procedures. Instead, she learned by snapping real pictures in real time. Her camera often pointed at a musician or a mesmerizing desert landscape. Yet Linda's life took a jarring turn when tragedy struck. Her mother, Lois, died in a plane crash. Losing her mother was devastating, and it left Linda in a cloud of grief. Shell-shocked, she found herself making what she would later describe as misguided decisions, chief among them, marrying a man named Melville C. Their time together was brief and unfulfilling. She realized quickly that their personalities clashed on every meaningful level. He was an academic, while she longed for wide-open spaces and a creativity-first kind of life. After a few tumultuous years, Linda left him. With her daughter from that marriage, Heather, in tow, she returned to Manhattan. It was a homecoming filled with uncertainty. She loved New York, the vibrancy, the cultural diversity, the creative hum that pulsed through streets alive at all hours. But she needed stability, a job, a foothold, Surprisingly, that opportunity arrived through a fairly ordinary position at Town & Country magazine, where she was hired as a receptionist and editorial assistant. A desk job might not sound glamorous, but it placed Linda in an environment teeming with photographers, editors, and the hustle of magazine publishing. Before long, she found herself enamored with a photographer named David Dalton. He taught her fundamentals that included lighting, framing, and capturing genuine expressions from subjects who might otherwise prefer to stay hidden behind their stage personas. Musicians who might have been dismissive or temperamental with other photographers were putty in her hands. She was approachable, not threatening or arrogant, and so they let their guards down. This disarming quality would become a hallmark of Linda's photographic style. She excelled at capturing unguarded, intimate moments, little glimpses of authenticity that often elude more formal photo shoots. It didn't take long for Linda to move from an amateur hobbyist to someone known within certain music circles as the photographer who could coax a real smile or a revealing gesture out of even the most elusive rock star. Then came her big break. Town & Country selected her to photograph the Rolling Stones on a yacht, an assignment that felt both daunting and exhilarating. Could she handle shooting the biggest band of that era, known for their edge, their swagger, their rebellious flair? The answer was a resounding yes. Linda soared with confidence, capturing stunning candid shots that displayed the Stones in their natural habitat, laughing, goofing around, occasionally lost in thought. It was a job that earned her respect in an industry that, at the time, wasn't exactly welcoming to female photographers. Her father once again urged her to get formal training, perhaps do a course, refine her craft in a structured academic setting, but Linda saw no need. The best lessons, she believed, were out there in the messy, unpredictable world, where she could keep learning by doing. And she did just that, year after year, assignment after assignment. She grew especially drawn to the live music scene, where sweat, emotion, and spontaneity coalesced into prime photographic fodder. Eventually, Linda found herself working at the Fillmore East Concert Hall, a hallowed ground for rock music at the time, where legendary names like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, and Simon and Garfunkel all passed through. With each shoot, Linda added more iconic snapshots to her growing collection. It was as though she had a backstage pass to the entire rock movement of the late 1960s, snapping photos the rest of the world would hunger to see. Naturally, it was inevitable that Linda would cross paths with the Beatles, the biggest musical phenomenon of that moment. They were already world famous, a band that had shaped pop culture in ways few had done before. Linda got the opportunity to photograph them backstage at Shea Stadium. She met Paul McCartney, the Beatles' bassist and co-lead vocalist who, along with John Lennon, had penned some of the most enduring songs of the 20th century. Paul was a superstar, often mobbed by fans, and rarely afforded a moment of real quiet. But with Linda, he experienced a different vibe. Perhaps her lack of pretense or her grounded love for nature and simple joys drew him in. Almost immediately, sparks flew between them. Paul was accustomed to short-lived affairs. His reputation as a ladies' man often made headlines. But something about Linda felt different. She was herself, never a groupie, never an awestruck fan. Instead, she acted like a friend who happened to know how to capture great photographs. She was fun, independent, and had a wide-open way of looking at the world. Even Linda's young daughter, Heather, charmed Paul with her bright spirit. They began dating, and in 1969 they decided on marriage. It was a significant milestone for both of them, but especially for Linda, who had just seen her photography career start to skyrocket. Many at the time assumed she would retire from public life and fade into Paul's shadow. but she refused to fit that mold. The Beatles, ironically, were nearing their end as a band. By 1970, they had officially split, leaving the public in shock. Paul, devastated and wrestling with depression, found solace in Linda's unwavering support. She became his confidant, often encouraging him to keep making music, to pick himself up even when the future seemed murky. Paul has repeatedly credited her as the person who emotionally rescued him during that tumultuous period. But Linda wasn't just offering moral support, she was game to jump into Paul's new projects. In 1971, they formed the band Wings, with Linda learning to play keyboards, something quite new for her. Critics were harsh at first, rolling their eyes at her perceived lack of musical finesse, but Linda worked diligently. She practiced, she observed, she listened, and she improved. Wings eventually soared, claiming multiple successes throughout the 1970s, with hits like Live and Let Die, garnering huge fan acclaim, and even an Oscar nomination for the theme from the James Bond film of the same name. She co-created with Paul, often writing and singing backup vocals, a surprising turn for someone who had primarily defined herself as a photographer. In parallel, Linda never abandoned her camera. She continued to document their life on the road, capturing behind-the-scenes glimpses of Wings' tours and Paul's creative process. Still, critics didn't let up. Many accused Linda of riding on Paul's coattails, saying that she would be a nobody without his name attached to hers. Linda herself acknowledged that she wasn't anywhere near Paul's caliber as a musician, but that never really mattered to her. She was in it for the fun, the closeness, the shared creative spark, and to support her husband's passion. Over time, her presence in Wings contributed to a distinct family vibe, one that fans eventually embraced. She was also a mother to 4 children now, 3 of them with Paul, plus Heather from her first marriage. Between raising kids, touring the world, and snapping endless rolls of film, Linda's life was a whirlwind. Not that life was always easy. Linda dealt with personal challenges, some of which included ongoing scrutiny from the press, the heartbreak of losing her mother years before, and the difficulties that come from blending a family in the public eye. Perhaps that's why Linda cherished animals and nature so fiercely. Those were escapes from the stress of constant media attention. She became a staunch advocate for animal rights, deeply committed to vegetarianism at a time when that lifestyle was far less mainstream than it is today. Linda wrote vegetarian cookbooks and launched a line of frozen vegetarian foods. Her mission was to show people that going meatless could be not only healthy but deeply satisfying for the palate. She also battled an enduring fear of flying, rooted in the trauma of her mother's plane crash. Yet she still traveled whenever necessary, facing that fear to stand by Paul on tours or photo assignments. That kind of bravery underscored who Linda was, a woman who wouldn't let her anxieties define her path. She overcame them, or at the very least, learned to coexist with them in order to chase the joys of family and creative work. Although Linda was so intimately associated with Paul, she was her own person in countless ways. She published books of photography that showcased not just rock icons, but also everyday slices of life. Children playing, animals wandering across farmland, quiet glimpses of family downtime. Her images had a tenderness, a sense of personal connection that made them feel relatable and honest. Her camera was not just a tool, it was a friend that accompanied her on adventures, capturing ephemeral moments that the rest of us might have missed. She once said that the best photos happen when the subject is truly at ease, and that was her gift, to put people and animals at ease, to capture something real in them. Then, in 1995, Linda's world shifted yet again with a serious, life-altering diagnosis. breast cancer. She handled it quietly, with a calm stoicism that surprised many people who expected her to publicly share every detail. She didn't want to burden her loved ones unnecessarily and continued to carry herself with grace, determined to remain as upbeat as possible. Yet the disease progressed, eventually reaching her liver. Paul stood by her side, as she had once stood by his during his dark nights of the soul. For a couple who had weathered the ups and downs of music stardom, paparazzi, personal losses, and everything else that came with being in the public eye, this was an immense test. Sadly, Linda succumbed to cancer on April 17, 1998, at the age of 56. Her passing left an unfillable void for Paul and the children. He described her as his guide, his anchor, the one who refused to give up on him. Linda's funeral was a quiet, private affair, though fans across the globe mourned collectively. Paul inherited her photographs and many of her other personal belongings, ultimately donating millions of dollars to cancer research in her honor. He also, in a gesture that spoke volumes about the depth of his love and respect for Linda, became a vegetarian, something she had encouraged him to do throughout their marriage. Though he hadn't fully committed to it while she was alive, her spirit moved him to make that change in the aftermath of her loss. In the years following her death, Linda's presence continued to make itself felt, both through the family's tributes and in the form of her published works. 1 year after her death, the photo collection Wide Open was released, showcasing the playful, spontaneous, and heartfelt style that had made Linda's photography stand out. Far from a mere vanity project, it demonstrated her artistic range and her ability to see beauty and honesty in small moments. The food brand she started, Linda McCartney Foods, carried on her legacy in promoting meatless alternatives. It found surprising success and longevity, reflecting the growing number of people worldwide who saw merit in a compassionate, animal-friendly approach to cooking and eating. In looking back on Linda's life, it's easy to label her as simply Paul McCartney's wife, but that description overlooks a far more nuanced and courageous story. Linda was a woman who defied her family's expectations, stepping away from the law-centered career path that would have been the easiest choice. She embraced her own passion for photography, learned from whoever would teach her, and never hesitated to push her way into new experiences. She was a musician in her own right, though an untrained one, ready to take on the challenge of standing on stage with a former Beatle and risk the public's harsh judgments of her abilities. She was an advocate for animal rights and vegetarianism long before the mainstream caught on. And most tellingly, she was someone who lifted up the people around her, her camera capturing them at their best, her unwavering support encouraging them to reach further. Yet Linda's life wasn't about polished perfection. She made mistakes, endured heartbreak, and occasionally dealt with setbacks in her personal and professional spheres. Her first marriage happened in the hazy swirl of grief. Her earliest attempts at photography were sometimes dismissed. Critics scoffed at her presence in Wings, suggesting she was merely along for the ride. But Linda's gentle resilience shone through all those criticisms. She always picked herself back up and found ways to grow stronger. Whether in her relationships or her art, she sought authenticity and kindness over shallow approval. That perspective ultimately won her many admirers, both among those who knew her personally and the countless fans who recognized her sincerity, either in her quiet, on-stage presence beside Paul or in the intimate photographs she shared with the world. The manner in which Linda and Paul approached family life also left a lasting impression. At a time when rock and roll often implied a reckless, party-driven lifestyle, Linda and Paul were raising children, spending time on farms, and focusing on simpler joys. Stories circulated about them riding horses, growing vegetables, taking quiet walks along the countryside. That sense of normalcy, amidst the swirl of global stardom, was something Linda craved. She often said that if you can't be happy just being yourself, gazing at a beautiful sky or listening to a bird's song, then no amount of fame or money will ever fill that void. There was a groundedness in her approach that proved inspiring to countless fans, especially women who saw in Linda a role model of how to be creative, family-oriented, and self-possessed all at once. Her final years, shadowed by cancer, only highlighted her bravery. While the press speculated incessantly on her condition, Linda maintained a gentle privacy, choosing to spend her energy on the things and people she loved most. She continued to encourage Paul musically, sometimes offering little nudges of inspiration. She lavished attention on her children, hoping to shield them from the darkness of her illness. Though she couldn't outrun her diagnosis, she infused those last days with as much love and positivity as possible. Her passing was swift and mercifully free of unnecessary spectacle, fitting for someone who never craved the spotlight just for attention's sake. After her death, the tributes poured in. Friends spoke of Linda's generosity, her readiness to laugh, her conscientious approach to animal rights, and her knack for brightening a room without stealing anyone else's thunder. Musicians recalled how disarming she was, how she managed to capture them on film at their most unguarded, revealing an emotional dimension that more formal photographers couldn't reach. Fans of Wings testified to how Linda's visible fun and camaraderie on stage gave their shows an extra spark, and her husband, Paul, continued to speak of her as his guiding light, a woman whose independent spirit never wavered, who dared to be different, and who insisted that love, family, and kindness mattered more than all the chart-topping hits in the world. Linda's children have carried on aspects of her legacy. Heather, Mary, Stella, and James each have found their own paths. Stella is a globally recognized fashion designer who emphasizes cruelty-free materials, echoing Linda's respect for animals. Mary has become a photographer and documentary filmmaker, channeling her mother's penchant for capturing authenticity on camera. It's as though Linda's creative spirit rippled outward through her family, leaving an imprint on everything they do. If you close your eyes and picture Linda McCartney, you might see her behind a camera, a small grin lighting her face as she captures that perfect instant, a fleeting second of raw humanity frozen in time. Maybe it's a shot of Paul plucking his guitar, or an image of her beloved kids chasing each other around a farm, or a random portrait of a horse set against a hazy sunrise. You'll sense that Linda wasn't snapping pictures for fame or acclaim, but out of a genuine love for the subject, that longing to hold on to a moment that once gone will never come again. Linda McCartney's life was a testament to the power of artistry, love, and compassion. Through her photography, music, and advocacy, she inspired countless people and left a legacy that continues to resonate today. Though her story ended far too soon, her contributions to the arts and her dedication to animal rights remain timeless. If you found Linda's story inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales of icons who shaped our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.